Hello everybody, welcome back to the channel. I'm Pastor Siri, and today on episode 2 we are going to be rethinking original sin. So as I mentioned on the first episode, there's nothing you have to believe. And yet we have been taught that there are very many things you're supposed to believe, either to be a good Christian, to be saved, or in general, that's just the way the world is. And I really want us to think again about a lot of the messages we have been taught that are absolutely normal. And so one of them that has bothered me for a long time and has bothered lots of people is the concept of original sin. Now, I'm not going to give a whole church history lesson here, but I will say that the concept of original sin did not originate in the Bible. It actually came a little bit later with a man called Augustine, who was very influential in the beginning of the church when the church had just come to power in the 4th century. And he had a lot of brilliant writings, and from his own personal experience, he came up with the concept of original sin. He felt himself as if he was very stuck in behaviors, almost kind of like addictive patterns that he could not get out of. And he finally fell into this understanding of the grace of God. And there you go, original sin. Everybody's kind of stuck in this thing, and we are all doomed but for the grace of God. Augustine was also huge in believing that salvation came through the church and you had to be baptized. All of these early things that have been passed along for hundreds of years and being seen as normal. Martin Luther himself was an Augustinian monk, so he was right in that train of thought. And his own experience, Martin Luther, was that he was plagued with guilt all the time, and he was infuriated with the concept that somehow he had to do something to save himself because he just didn't know how it was possible. And it all comes down to this idea that God looks at us because we can't do things perfectly, because we make mistakes, because we think thoughts that are awful, because we say things that are awful, because we do things that are awful, and it's universal. Thus, there must be something deeply wrong with humanity down to our core. And there's nothing we can do to save ourselves. There's no way we can climb up the ladder to God. So God has to come down to us. And there is most of Christian theology. And listen to the hymns that we sing on Good Friday and Easter. My unworthiness, my shame, Jesus came and he died. We're going to talk about salvation and those theories of atonement on another video. But this concept that we are fundamentally unworthy, unlikable, unlovable, ready to go to hell in a handbasket if God wasn't so nice and figured out some way to save us, is deeply problematic. I'm going to tell you a different way to look at things, and we'll see how we go. In the very beginning of all things, when God was creating through God's love and curiosity and compassion and desire to understand and learn and grow, spread all of creation out from God's heart center. What do you want to call it, the Big Bang or something else? There was this beautiful explosion of energy that came out of love. And all of this energy, which was maybe at first invisible, slowly became visible and dense and more dense. We know that really, really high frequencies of light, and then as they get denser into sound and denser and denser and denser, they start to become visible. And soon you had visible spinning pieces of stars and planets and other things that got denser and denser. And as life got more complex, it also began to get more conscious. And if you look at the planet here on Earth that we live on and the variety of ways in which life has expressed itself in plant life, in animal life, and things that are so tiny like wonderful little tardigrade water bears that we didn't even know they existed until like 5 years ago. Don't quote me on that. The point is, as life got more creative and more complex, it also grew more conscious. And that entered into a unique time period in at least our Earth history, where now these little souls that God had created, these little baby souls, could now enter the world in order to learn and grow. Now, we could have stayed close to God's heart center, but there's something about leaving home to learn that's so important. We know this in our own human life stage. We see how when you have a baby that's so dependent on the parent that they don't even really know that they're separate from the parent. They don't really understand. But as they grow and they begin to develop, they move away from the parent, back and forth. And eventually at some point, the child is old enough and leaves home to find their own life. And along the whole way, that child makes mistakes and they learn from messing around and finding out. And even in your own life, if you're preparing for a vocation, you know that you can study books and you can watch YouTube videos. And that is really interesting up here. But it isn't until you get out and you start doing, you start student teaching, you start getting out there and apprenticing that all of a sudden you learn hard and fast. There's nothing like experiencing. We as baby souls wanted to understand life and God and ourselves on a bigger scale. And so God allowed us to come into this world. And the minute we came into this world to learn and to grow, we forgot. We forgot where we came from. And this world was all we saw. God could literally still be right next to us, right here, all the time as God is, but we can't see God. And so kind of like a toddler who doesn't have object permanence yet, when you put your hands put your face behind your eyes and go, peekaboo, we have a moment where we think that person is gone. We think the toy is gone because it's under the blanket. Because we can no longer see the invisible world, we feel disconnected. Because we no longer have that sense of all of these beautiful baby souls and angels all close to God, now we're out here in this foreign world and we're scared. We feel separated. And fear enters the picture. Fear as our own creation. Fear of wondering, well, how do I survive? How do I get through this? And with that fear and that feeling of separation, we have a clue to help us through it, and that is our deep need for connection. And so as we're reaching out, trying to be in community, trying to be loved, we try to figure out how to be loved. And in our little immature self that doesn't see the reality as it is, it only sees what we can figure out. And we see all of reality through our own lens of needing to be loved and to fear and fearing that we're going to be rejected, fearing we're going to be hurt, fearing we're going to die. That begins to form a human consciousness and a story. And with that comes not just fear, but shame. This deep feeling that we may not actually be worthy of love. Can you remember some of your earliest memories as a child where maybe a parent yelled at you or a parent lost their cool, an adult lost it with you? And maybe it was minor or maybe it was major. And it was not your fault that you would have internalized that as, oh crap, there's something wrong with me. Because when you are young, when you don't know and you don't have a wide perspective, you are literally taking everything in. All that you know about the universe, all that you know about yourself is coming from outside of you. You don't yet fully have a developed internal compass to help you know who you are. You're still getting that from your parents and your siblings and your friends. And guess what? They're doing the same thing. So we're all a bunch of people afraid and wanting love. And then when people hurt each other, we internalize that. We think it's saying something about who we are, and thus it forms shame. And we form, every single one of us collectively as humanity, we form parts of us that try to protect us from the pain of feeling unworthy. And so we learn to say, oh, okay, I guess good little girls don't say that. I guess good boys and strong men don't do that. And we internalize these messages and we start to pull ourselves apart internally okay, I'm going to take all of my loudness and put it over here. I'm going to take all of my crying and put it over here. I'm going to take all of my laziness and put it back here so that I am good and perfect and I will be loved. And when the whole planet is operating off of this story of trying to be lovable and trying to prove that you're worthy, it creates a massive matrix of human consciousness that is based off of shame and fear and unworthiness. And it becomes a virus. It becomes a sickness that pervades us, every single one of us. Now, some people seem to get a little less sick with it if they've grown up with loving parents. And some people are so filtered with it from maybe a very abusive childhood, maybe living in a war-torn area and seeing some really horrific stuff, that it is really hard to imagine that the world is not hell and you are not just a piece of crap. So one of the things we do in this story of the world, as I'll call it, is we invent ways to prove our worthiness. We find ways to make ourselves good, as I mentioned. Maybe we have to be pretty, or we have to be thin, or we have to be smart, or we have to be super helpful, or we have to be always happy and always lovable and always cute, or we have to be really creative and unique and special. Whatever it is, we invent ways to prove that we are good enough. We do this through money and through success and through power and through privilege. We invent things like, well, if you're white, then you must be better. If you're male, then you must be better. If you're straight, then you must be better. And we categorize all human beings up and down this ladder. And guess what? One of the things that makes us feel better, that makes us feel accepted in our tribe and belonging and good, is religion. I believe that all religion, at its core, is a beautiful message and inspiration of connection from God reaching out to us and showing us how to connect. But we are stuck in a world of shame, in the story of the world, and often we pull religion into our story. And so we make religion just another way to climb the ladder, another thing that we can do to somehow make ourselves worthy. And that's often by, I believe the right thing. I'm doing the right thing. I read the Bible. I follow the Bible. There's a lot of language that we have in which we feel like we have done something to make ourselves worthy now to God. The answer to that is not to say, no, there's nothing you can possibly do to make God happy. God looks at all of us and thinks we're all pieces of crap, and there's no way that you can ever climb up to God, so God's coming down to you. That's still in the story of the world that's based off of shame, that's based off of our unworthiness. And as Brene Brown says beautifully as a shame researcher, shame does not motivate. It keeps you stuck. In fact, shame is the lowest human frequency that we can vibrate as a human being. It is contracted, it is uncreative, it is defensive. The more we feel bad about ourselves, the more we feel like we're crap and there's nothing we can do and everything we do is bad, the more we pull into ourselves and get defensive and then reach out whenever we're triggered and scratch other people because we're trying to protect ourselves. How can you blame people for trying to be lovable and trying to prove themselves that they're good enough in all of these sweet little immature ways that we do? We're immature and we're small and we're scared and we're trying so hard to get through this life and we just want to be loved. Every single one of us. But I believe that when God looks at us, God sees something deeply lovable. Because at our core, we came right from God. God just sees us sort of trapped. It's kind of like you have a bunch of people who are walking along in a forest and they get their feet stuck in mud. And all of a sudden, they can't move any further and they're starting to panic. And someone comes across this group of people and they're screaming and they're yelling and they're crying out and someone goes, wow, those are a bunch of crazy people. They're a bunch of bad people. Look how they're yelling. No one's looking down to see that there's a stuckness that was not their fault. And if they had love and if they had compassion, they would offer a way out of that stuckness. They wouldn't judge them and blame them and say, well, you're a bunch of reactive people. You need to calm down. So that is why I feel in our faith and our religion and our spirituality, when we begin with the premise that we came from God and are inherently lovable, that can help us to begin to detox from the story of the world, to detox from the story that keeps us in unworthiness and shame. And I believe that's one of the things Jesus came to do, is he came to show us how to detox from the story and live in what is actually real, that we are so close to God, that we all do come from the same place. We are all equal and we are all beloved, that it's not a ladder of who's worthy and proving that we're worthy. It's a web. It's a beautiful web in which all living things are connected. And when we work together with love and compassion and cooperation, we figure it out. We figure out how to be fully who we were always meant to be. That is the maturing of the human soul. That is the maturing of the human spirit. And there are people who figured this out. There are people who've done this. We can see around the world over time and throughout cultures that there are always those people who are so compassionate and so wise and so calm. They've somehow managed to take the suffering of their mind and get it out, to detox themselves from the lies of the world and to live and breathe in a completely different way. So clearly they managed to get themselves unstuck. So in the next couple of videos, we're going to talk about exactly what Jesus came to teach us. We're going to rethink salvation and we're going to rethink atonement. Thank you very much for listening. And by the way, if you got something out of this video, I just ask you to maybe return a little something with a like, a comment, or a share to someone who you think could use this message too. Until next time, bye-bye.